What's up, everybody? Welcome into the 249 Miles of College Football podcast on video. I am so pumped for this. This is a new step in the direction of the podcast, and you'll be able to get it on video, as you're seeing now. You'll be able to get it on audio as well. However you may be listening to podcasts, Cole Carmody from Go Power Cat and 24/7 Sports is going to be joining on video. You'll be able to see Cole in person as I talk to him about the Cats. Today is the Kansas State Wildcats preview. So we're getting into schedule, predictions, players to watch, everything that you need to know about the Kansas State Wildcats going into the season, which is only here in like 2.5 weeks. They play in Farmageddon. Like 17 days, people. We are almost there. K-State, we're talking about them today. We'll do Kansas next week. Missouri the week after that, and then we got my national preview. I'm going to give you my top 25. I'm going to give you conference champion predictions, playoff predictions, everything like that. But today, it's K-State and all about the Kansas State Wildcats. Let's get this thing going with the first half. All right, so the first half is where I'm going to just dive into things that I noticed that I want to talk about for this. Second half is going to be Cole Carmody. He'll be joining, and then overtime, the coaches poll is out. K-State is in the coaches poll included. All three locals technically are in it, quote unquote, but K-State's the only one who's actually in the top 25. AP poll comes out in a few days. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week with Kansas's preview as it's going to be out then. But all right, so for K-State, I am super intrigued by just everything this season with K-State in terms of what they can be. One of the things that we know about K-State is like the floor is very commonly the same. They're not going to go 6-6. They're not going to go 5-7. You know, it's just not going to happen. They'll be 7-5, 8-4, 9-3. That's what we can rely on K-State to be most of the time. If you look back at the last 5 years, one thing that I'm going to do for all of the teams is look back just at the history of the teams the last few years as it pertains to what they could be this upcoming season. They have had a above 500 record. They've won no less than 8 games in each of the last 4 seasons, including being 3-1 in bowl games. They also have a conference title win. So what could that be for this year? I think that their expectations are to be in the Big 12 title game. I would say that that's what people should expect them to be given the talent level that they bring back, given the players that they have coming into the portal, returning players, all of that stacking together of they've got a roster that is in the upper echelon of the Big 12. They've got expectations, having gone 9-4 in each of the last 2 seasons. They want to take that next step. Last year felt like they would be in that Big 12 title game. Things didn't really pan out that way based on how the season ended, but the expectations for Kansas State, people should have to be in the Big 12 title game. College football playoff, I think, it's there. It feels like those were kind of the expectations last year. You know, Texas and Oklahoma are gone. We're the favorites. This is our year. Things didn't quite go that way. Things are a little bit different as Arizona State, of course, entered the fold last year. They're going to be really good again. Utah should be able to bounce back. KU, we don't know exactly how the Jayhawks are going to be. We know Baylor could be sneaky good. There's some other teams in the mix, of course, as well. Texas Tech is spending a lot of money in the portal. So the Big 12 is one of the most competitive conferences. So to me, if they make the Big 12 title game, let's say they go 9-3 or 10-2 and they make the Big 12 title game, but they don't make the playoff because they don't win the Big 12 title game, I think there's some disappointment there, but I don't think your expectations can say it underwhelmed your expectations because they have a shot to play essentially a play-in game to the college football playoff, and then things have to go the way that they may. And for K-State fans, of course, fans are going to want them to win that game, obviously, but if they make the Big 12 title game, I don't see how you can be disappointed if they don't make the college football playoff. I think, obviously, the college football playoff is some icing on the cake, if you will. Avery Johnson, we're going to get into him in a moment. This might be the year for Avery Johnson. I feel like this is a year where we're going to see him grow. He's going to be a key part, obviously, as he plays the quarterback position, as to where K-State goes, how good they actually are. Looking at the schedule briefly, then I'm going to go game by game a little bit later on here in just a moment with predictions. I think the 4 biggest games, I got 4 of them for you. Farmageddon, obviously in week 0, coming up in 17 days, against Iowa State. Massive game. in terms of momentum, direction. They win that game all of a sudden. They turn heads. Everybody's paying attention to Kansas State. Okay, they beat Iowa State. Let's see where they go from here. Then the schedule kind of unfolds for them leading up to week 7 at Baylor. Sneaky game there. I think Baylor is going to be solid. They got one of the better quarterbacks in the conference in Sawyer Robertson. Dave Aranda's crew was solid last year. They'll be good again. K-State on the road in Waco. I don't know. Maybe it's a sneaky game for them. But that's 2. The Sunflower Showdown in week 10. It is. That game is massive, obviously. I think that game actually, and I'll get into this a little bit later, that game has huge implications, in my opinion, as to who makes the Big 12 title game and who does not, regarding conference record and everything else. More on that a little bit later. And then week 11 against Texas Tech. So all these games are technically road games. Farmageddon's not. It's a neutral site game. It might as well be, a neutral site game is just a neutral site game, and that's just the way that it goes. But those are the 4 big ones for me that are going to not necessarily determine the season for the Wildcats this year, but I think those are key games that everybody should be paying attention to this upcoming season. So expectations already kind of ran through that. I will say this. Avery Johnson and his development, I think, is going to be key as to what your expectations should be. I think everybody's expecting him to take the next step. He said at Big 12 Media Days, one thing that stood out to me was he's bigger, stronger, faster, mentally feels more comfortable. A lot of things lining up to him having a better season last year. So, I mean, he elevated himself to a level where he's more talented than Will Howard was. And that's no shade at Will Howard. That's kind of what we heard last year is this man might be more athletic and more physically gifted. Also has a better arm. We didn't really see the arm part of the equation. And some of that, I think, is just the wide receiver room wasn't as strong as what it could have been. Obviously, with Jace Brown, you keep him back, which is key. Dylan Edwards out of the backfield can be very effective. Joe Jackson, the backfield's going to be good. Wide receiver-wise, they added a couple guys in the portal, hopefully who will be able to help and be a little bit better for Avery. But for me, Avery Johnson, not that this is a make-or-break year for him, but it feels like this is the year that we see him elevate to the quarterback that we thought he might be last year, that we heard he could be last year. Where we're seeing his effectiveness in the run game, we're seeing all of those tools that we saw last year, but also him elevating to being that playmaker through the air. There were moments last year where it's like, man, he threw a dime. Like there's only a couple quarterbacks in the country who can make that throw. Being able to elevate that on a more consistent level, that I think is what we see here. And if it doesn't happen this year, is it going to happen? I don't know. I think that those are the conversations, at least in my mind. That's how I view Avery Johnson this year is this is the year that either all the pieces in the puzzle come together or maybe it's just not going to happen, and that's okay. And not that Avery Johnson, that means he's not a good quarterback. He's a good quarterback right now. But there's a level, based on what we've been told, where he goes from really good to elite, and he's got that capability. He can do that this year, I think, with the transfer portal additions, him being bigger, stronger, faster, more comfortable with the system and everything. All of it collectively coming together. It feels like for a massive season for Avery Johnson. I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman, but if you were to tell me that he's in the Heisman Trophy ceremony, like if he's a finalist, K-State make the playoff, K-State are in that Big 12 title game, he elevated himself. All of those things I think are possible for Avery Johnson and for the Kansas State Wildcats this season. That leads me now to 5 players to watch who will be key to me in terms, of determining how the season's going to go. Obviously, Avery Johnson for the reasons that I just said. Dylan Edwards I've got on this list, but I think it's really a combination of him and Jackson in the running back room. Thunder, lightning, power, punch, quickness, agility, whatever you want to have, all of it is in that room. Then you add Avery Johnson's effectiveness as a dual threat quarterback. They can be really dangerous, this offense can be, and I feel like it just needs to take the next step. Dylan Edwards returning, Avery Johnson, of course, returning as well, and then Joe Jackson being a guy that kind of bursted out in that bowl game against Rutgers last year. You feel more comfortable after the loss of DJ Giddens. Maybe we'll be actually okay in the running back room, and the offense can be effective. So the running back room-ish, Avery Johnson. Also, wide receiver, so obviously Jace Brown is going to be a key factor in the season. They've got Bradley transferring in from Boston College, and then Jerron Tips from Purdue. Purdue stunk last year. That doesn't shadow over what I think Jerron Tips can bring. Obviously, Purdue is a bit of a mess. Offensively, they were okay. Defensively, they stunk so bad. Offensively, they were okay. Tibbs was a part of that. He comes into a good system, better quarterback, better coach. It all feels like it could come together, and he's a guy maybe that you need to watch. Obviously, Jace Brown is a key and a big-time player, but I try to dig a little bit deeper with the key players and how the season will go. They'll need another wide receiver that Avery Johnson can rely on, as well as maybe Lincoln Cure, depending on how much playing time he gets, as to how the season kind of shakes out for them. You got to go deeper than just the wide receiver 1, running back 1, I think, to see key players who will help determine the season and how things go. Austin Romaine is a stud. He is one of the best linebackers in the country, in the conference, who are returning for this upcoming season. He's like the backbone, if you will, of that defense. He's a massive player in regards to how things go. A lot of experience returning for the defense. VJ Payne is another guy. Those are two guys on defense that are going to be major factors leadership-wise, communication-wise. And the defense was solid last year, but being able to come together and make some plays, maybe turn the ball over a little bit more, I think those are two guys that are going to be key in how the defense performs and how things go for the Cats on that side of the ball. So those are 5 players that I think will determine essentially Kansas State's season this year. All right, record prediction. So this is interesting. The game against Iowa State, to start things off, as I said, it's one of the key games. I think they win that game. I think the hype is high. I think everybody's feeling really good about themselves. I think they can win that game against Iowa State. Then you follow down a trickle-down effect of games that they should be winning, non-conference-wise, jumping into early conference, Arizona, UCF. Like, these are games that K-State should be winning. You get to the game against Baylor. I think this is a sneaky game that might cause K-State some problems. I'm not going to say that it's a for sure loss, but it's one that people need to really be paying attention to. KU, as I said, I think that game determines how things go in regards to the season. Texas Tech at home, I think K-State can handle them at home. So the Sunflower Showdown is at KU. It's back on campus in Lawrence, as they're not playing at Arrowhead this upcoming season because of the renovations. To me, I think this year, and Utah's another sneaky game for them to for people to watch. But to me, I think Kansas State goes 9-3 this year. Really good record. And the Big 12 is really tight. I don't think K-State actually make the Big 12 title game this year, even at 9-3. And that's not to say that it's necessarily disappointing or a bad season. I think it's a little bit disappointing. But as I said, the game against KU is going to determine how things go in my mind. I think Kansas beats K-State. Sorry. I think Kansas beats K-State this year. And KU actually ends up making a run, going 9-3 as well. Iowa State goes 9-3 as well, based on tiebreakers and how things shake out. K-State goes 9-3, but they miss out on the Big 12 title game. A good bowl game, but things still are back in the up. I think that they can get double-digit wins this year, and that's kind of how it shakes out for K-State. Again, it's not a bad season, but I think given the expectations that people have of making the Big 12 title game, if they fall short of that, it's going to be really disappointing if they're not in that Big 12 title game. But I think people have to remember, when talking about the Big 12, that you need to understand how good the Big 12 is actually. It's not top heavy, but when we're talking about talent from top to bottom, I've talked about this on other podcasts as well, and I'm sure it'll come up again as the season goes on. The Big 12 is maybe the most competitive conference top to bottom in the country. Iowa State, Utah, K-State, KU, based on last year, I mean, they could have easily gone 9-3 last year. Arizona State, BYU potentially. Nobody knows how good Oklahoma State's going to be. Baylor, solid. TCU might surprise some people and be okay this year. There's a lot of teams, 7, 8 teams that you could picture winning 8 or 9 games, and you could almost talk yourself into it, and it makes some sense. That makes it really difficult to predict. So I'm going to say K-State goes 9-3. I think they fall short in a couple of games that are testers. 9-3 is a good season, but I don't think they make the Big 12 title game, and I think as a result, that makes people a little bit disappointed based on what the expectations in my mind, and I think a lot of people's minds should be for the 2025 season. All right, let's get to the second half. I am happy to welcome in Cole Carmody to the 249 Miles of College Football podcast. Cole, you're the recruiting editor for Go Power Cat on 24/7 Sports. So I want to make sure I got that right. Is that good?
You got it, man. You got it.
How's it going? This is the first time you joined the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. What exactly, I guess, just to kick things off, what are your expectations for this team this year? You know, Avery Johnson's back, Dylan Edwards is back, a slew of other guys. Obviously, Coach Kleiman still going at it. What are the expectations in your mind for K-State this year?
I think honestly, for expectations for the team, especially inside the Veneer Complex in Manhattan, is they want to get to a Big 12 championship, and they've talked about that. They haven't shied away from that. In years past, they've said that, oh, if you don't make the Big 12 championship, it's not, the season's not lost. But they're really kind of leaning into that mantra of, hey, they want and they expect to get to the Big 12 championship. And anytime you have a returning starting quarterback, it doesn't take a genius to realize that teams who have returning starting quarterbacks typically have higher production than teams who don't. We've seen that. We've seen that. We saw that in Jalen Daniels' second full season when they went 8-4. We've seen that with when Kansas State had Will Howard. They ended up winning the Big 12 championship. So we've seen that before, but I think it really comes down to, will Avery Johnson progress as to will those expectations get met? And I'm sure we'll be digging into that.
One of the things that I've thought about, and I talked about it on a couple podcasts ago. What is a good season? What is a bad season? And K-State finds themselves. I feel like they're a program that you can always rely on them going at least 7-5, and
Hmm.
most of the time they're going to be 8-4, 9-3. They're going to be in that range. A bad season to me is more of a 6-6, or you don't make a bowl game, obviously. But a good one, I would say anywhere from 9-3 or better. I think fans might agree with that sentiment. Obviously, they want to make the college football playoff, but if you were to say, hey, they go 9-3, they make it to the Big 12 title game and they don't quite win it, but they got to the Big 12 title game, I feel like that's people would consider that a good season. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think honestly, the expectation amongst fans, that was the expectation last year for this
Mm,
team. And I think that maybe might have been a little bit premature. They had a lot of younger guys who were kind of thrust into some roles last year, and they had a chance. They were 8-1 until they kind of collapsed at the end of the season, but they were right there. And I think a lot of folks forget that.
yeah.
So I think the expectation really, and the hope amongst the K-State fan base is, you're exactly right, Drew. They want to get to the Big 12 championship, but I feel like it's not necessarily Big 12 championship or bust with this group. But if the season starts off in Ireland with a win, then I feel like it might start to look that way, because not only are you kind of having that jolt to the start of the season, but you're also knocking off one of the better teams in the Big 12. And so if you've proven that you can do that before the calendars hit September 1st, well, you set yourself up to really make a deep run at this thing. So I honestly think that the expectation amongst the fans, and a good season for the fans, would be, hey, win that Big 12 championship. There's a lot of folks around Manhattan who really, really expect this team to be right in it at the end of the year.
You mentioned Avery Johnson. One of the things that stood out to me from Big 12 media days is he's like, look, I'm bigger, I'm faster, I'm stronger. I feel like mentally I'm more comfortable with the system, and having been a starter for a full season now, it feels like I remember last year people were talking about, man, this guy, he's got the athleticism that Will Howard had, if not more. He's got maybe more arm talent. We didn't necessarily see everything come together. Is this the year where he's more comfortable in the system? Matt Wells was the OC. Chris Kleiman is got full confidence in him. It's his team, him getting bigger, faster, stronger. All of these things, Jace Brown stayed. All of this put together feels like this is the year for Avery Johnson, or not that it's not, but it feels like this is it for Avery Johnson. This is his best chance for him to be in the Heisman conversation, for
Right.
him to lead this team to a playoff appearance, and then who knows, obviously, with the draft and stuff after that. But it feels
Right.
like this is that year where all the puzzle pieces kind of fit together.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, the hype around Avery Johnson coming out of high school was amplified because he was staying in state. Had Avery Johnson decided he wanted to go to Washington, had Avery Johnson decided he wanted to go to Oregon, I'm not sure that the hype around him would have been as big as it is right now. And he played a lot as a freshman. Think back to his freshman year, he scored 5 rushing touchdowns in a game against Texas Tech, broke a school record. Started obviously last year, had some success, and then there's a moment in time that I go back to, and it was against Colorado, and K-State obviously ended up winning that game, one of the best wins of the season for them. But Avery Johnson got hurt in that game and had to come out for a drive. And he didn't miss a single start the entire season, but it was pretty clear that from that moment on, Avery was not himself. He was fighting it mentally, he was fighting it physically, and he just didn't have the same capabilities on the ground that made him so successful in the first half of the season. So I think a healthy Avery Johnson puts it all together and does have a successful year. The way that the NFL is now with quarterbacks, Michael Penix played 25 years in college before he came out into the NFL. They like getting those older quarterbacks. I would be very surprised, quite honestly, unless Avery Johnson has one of the best seasons of any quarterback in college football this year, if he decides to come out for the NFL draft, just because the NFL likes older quarterbacks and guys can make a lot of money in college now. So I do think Avery Johnson has 2 more years, but I do think that this is the year. If he's going to become a star, we need to see it this year. And I'm very excited to see what he can do.
Speaking of stars who are good recruits, high profile recruits in state, obviously Lincoln Cure is the massive get for Coach Kleiman. Does his signing impact anything in terms of the future classes with guys that Chris Kleiman feels comfortable going after, or just other players noticing, okay, he picked K-State over Oregon. Is this something that Coach Kleiman is actually building? Is there something in Manhattan that I need to be maybe paying a little bit more attention to as it pertains to football?
It's a good question because the way that the recruiting world is now, it is vastly different than it was even 3 years ago when I started doing this job. I truly believe that now we're starting to see, especially on the high school rank, relationships are starting to matter a little bit more. Unless you are Texas Tech, who literally has came out and said that they will spend twice as much on a high school kid as any other school in the country, which don't even get me started on that. It's crazy. But unless you're one of those schools who's willing to pay $300,000 for a kid, relationships are going to matter because teams have to start to budget. Okay, how much is a 4-star tight end worth coming out of high school versus a transfer portal tight end who had production for 2 years? So teams have to start to balance how much is this guy worth versus this guy worth. And ultimately, what you're going to find is that, okay, well, a lot of the high school kids are valued at the same. It's no secret that you are not going to get a 5-star tight end to come out of Western Kansas every single year. Now, we are seeing one in Ian Premer who just committed to Notre Dame just about a month ago. So we've seen some of that happen with the higher rated kids in Kansas. But to answer your question, I really don't think that K-State's going to change its strategy and start to go after these high 4-star, 5-star kids. That's just not the kind of kid that comes to K-State, mostly because they aren't in their recruiting area. You're going to have to go to Texas. You have to go to Florida. You have to go to the southern part of the United States. And that's not really somewhere where K-State has those roots to where they're able to draw kids. But what I think it does do is I think it starts to elevate the floor. So instead of those low 3-star kids, they're starting to bring in those middle to high 3-star kids on a much more consistent basis to where now you're seeing, okay, the talent floor is being elevated. The ceiling probably isn't as high as fans want it to be right now, but the floor is being elevated. And the higher you can raise your floor, well, eventually you're going to start to bring in some of those bigger fish.
It feels like that's like the K-State way, where like what we talked about at the start is that it feels like there's a baseline with Coach Kleiman and his history going back to Bill Snyder, what he always seemed to do. They're always in that 17 to 25 range in the preseason poll, and they just stay there throughout the year. They might get up into the top 10, but they're a consistent 8-4, 9-3 team that you can rely on in terms of that floor. Is interesting. You mentioned NIL, and obviously with the recruiting stuff, you're more in that. It's really impacted things and how everything has gone. Do you feel like because with KU it's interesting because they've got the basketball side of things where they're dedicating with revenue share, more dollars. Kentucky's kind of doing the same thing. Duke, I'm sure, is doing something similar. with K-State, there might be more of a balance in terms of the budget that goes into it. Are you hearing anything in terms of how I guess how they're utilizing the NIL budget to go and get players, whether it be from the portal or the freshman class? Because I think, and you understand this because you cover the sport. It's almost a year by year thing where if you know that you've got a lot of guys returning, you might hit that freshman class a little bit harder. And then
Right.
if you realize you're losing guys, then maybe you still got Avery Johnson. Let's go hit the portal and try to bring in as many players as we can to win right now.
So I will tell you that a lot of K-State's NIL focus is focused on in-house retention.
Mm,
And instead of going out and saying we're going to spend buku dollars in the transfer portal, which they very well could do, a lot of folks I think don't realize that K-State is incredibly well funded with their NIL. Before the rev share, they were pretty much able to bring in anyone they wanted, especially on the basketball front. You know, look at
mm,
Coleman Hawkins, PJ
yeah.
Haggerty, like that money is there. Um, for football, it's a little bit different because they are so focused on keeping the Avery Johnsons, on keeping the Dylan Edwards and some of these. Austin Romaine, a guy we haven't brought up yet, who's the number one rated returning linebacker according to Pro Football Focus in all of college football. They want to keep these guys in Manhattan. And so if they perform, then they pay them what they're worth. And so as opposed to going out and getting that production, they're focused on keeping that in-house talent. And I will tell you what that does is sometimes I don't think it really messes up the high school recruiting side because, again, K-State knows what they want to spend on their high school recruiting class, but it could have impacted the transfer portal. But again, when you are keeping your stars, then you don't have to go and acquire stars. And so it's an interesting strategy. It's definitely one that's different than we brought up Texas Tech, than a school like Texas Tech, but
Mhm.
they trust in their development. They trust in their process. The money is definitely there because if the money wasn't there, then they wouldn't be able to keep an Avery Johnson. So I think what they're doing is really good. It seemed to work so far. Who knows how long it's going to be able to work. The thing about keeping your stars is you have to develop your stars. And so K-State's done that. We'll see if they can do that after this core is gone.
You mentioned Austin Romaine. I'm going to bring him up now. So he feels like the backbone of the defense. Like he's the heart and soul, the guy that is the true leader. Obviously, being a linebacker, you're in the middle of that defense, anyways. He obviously is one of these guys. But who are some players that I don't know if it's three or if it's four or five that when you think of how the season's going to go, Avery
Mhm.
Johnson is one of them, obviously too. But if there's anybody other than Avery Johnson, who are some guys that will determine kind of how the season ends up going for Kansas State and be pivotal in that?
Well, the first guy that jumps out to me is VJ Payne, and VJ
Mm,
Payne has been
yeah.
essentially a 3-year starter. He played a lot as a freshman as well. He's back for his senior season, clocked in at over 23 miles an hour this spring in the catapult testing, where they essentially test how fast they can run. The fastest player on the team, and he's a 6'4", 220-pound safety. You don't see that very often, so that's one guy I think who I have my eyes on as far as if he is good, and it will really help the back end of that defense. But really, I think a lot is going to be determined by the offensive line. And, that's not necessarily one singular position group or one singular position, but I think as a group, it's really imperative that they have success. I mean, they're breaking in at least 3 new starters, and that's something that's been talked about ad nauseum this offseason. They did hit the transfer portal. They got a guy in JB Nelson who played at Penn State last year. Terrence Enos was at Pitt. George Fitzpatrick, who unfortunately had a medical condition, he's not going to play against Iowa State, but we do expect him to be back sooner rather than later. He transfers in from Ohio State. And so you've got guys who have come from winning programs that are expected to be along that offensive line. We'll see how it pans out. If they are, up to the hype, if they are up to the challenge, I think this Kansas State offense is going to be really good. But I would really say that VJ Payne can determine a lot back there in the secondary because you know what you're getting in Austin Romaine. K-State returns a lot of defensive line. So I would say VJ Payne and then pretty much anyone along that offensive line. If they work together as a unit, then Kansas State is going to be in really good shape.
Uh, Kansas State makes the playoff if what happens?
I think they make the playoff if they minimize the mistakes that happened last year. And it's incredibly easy to say. But I went through on Twitter earlier this week and I had a thread and it was Avery Johnson's statistics. He finished with 25 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. That was amongst the 13 game schedule. And a lot of folks don't know this. He actually broke Will Howard's single season passing touchdown record last year. Will Howard had 24, Avery Johnson had 25.
Hmm.
And in 9 of those games, the 9 wins that K-State had, Avery Johnson threw for 21 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. And if you multiply that out amongst the 13 games, assuming that K-State were to either make a Big 12 championship or a bowl game, I want to say it was like 28 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And I say all this to say that there's only 4 quarterbacks who had both over 28 touchdowns and 6 interceptions or less. And it was Kevin Rourke of Indiana. It was Dylan Gabriel of Oregon. It was Jackson Dart of Ole Miss. And then I want to say it was Cade Klubnik of Clemson.
Hmm.
3 of those 4 quarterbacks made the college football playoff. The other one was Jackson Dart, who was a first round pick. So I say all of that to say if Avery Johnson is consistent, then K-State is going to be right in it at the end.
Is it a confidence thing with Avery Johnson? Because I feel like it just took a little bit for him to get comfortable. And I don't know if that was the OC change. I don't know if that was just getting accustomed to being the guy and it being
Mhm.
his offense. But it seems like because there are moments that you watch him make throws and you're like, oh my goodness, that was a dime right there. Like there's very few quarterbacks can make that throw. And then you see some mistakes like the one in the BYU game where obviously I think everybody just got a
Right.
little bit flustered with how that first half ended. It just everything bad could have happened.
Yeah.
It did in the span of 3 minutes of game time. But it feels like if he gets off to that start, to your point earlier, if they beat Iowa State and Avery Johnson looks like the goods, all of a sudden the hype around that program I feel like gets to be a little bit more and more. And the way that the schedule pans out, it feels like they're capable of going on one of those runs where they're going to be in that conversation of making it to the Big 12 title game, and not just that, but maybe even the favorite down the line of being in the college football playoff too.
I think the confidence is a key factor, but I think the surrounding pieces are even more of a factor. And I go back to last year and I look at the receivers he had, and they had Jace Brown, obviously one of the best returning wideouts in the conference. But you can't just have one wide receiver, right? That's not just something you can have. They had Dante Cephas and Jaden Jackson were the next two leading receivers. And if you don't know who those guys are, that's totally okay because here in about 2 years, I probably won't even remember them. Okay. They were incredibly bad. Let's just call it how it is. They were bad last year for K-State. They were 2 older guys. Once the season kind of went on, K-State tried to kind of work some younger guys in there. Trey Spivey had some action. He ultimately now is at Arizona. Due to some NIL disagreements. We'll just call it like that. But K-State brings in Jaron Bradley from Texas Tech and Boston College, who's had success under Matt Wells before at Texas Tech. And they also bring in a guy who's quietly flown under the radar in Jerron Tibbs. Now, who is Jerron Tibbs? Well, Jerron Tibbs was the leading receiver at Purdue last year, the same Purdue team that went 1-11. So take that for what it's worth. But folks are really high on this receiving core now. So I think that if he has just competent pieces around him, it's going to make him so much better. He's already has Dylan Edwards and the second running back, Joe Jackson, had a breakout bowl game as well. So I think the running back position is not going to see much of a drop off, even with DJ Giddens now in the NFL. But he has that group of receivers who I think folks are cautiously optimistic on. On top of that, we know how good the tight ends were last year. Every single one comes back. So it's really going to be, can those receivers step up and be competent? If the answer is yes, then Avery Johnson is going to be in a good spot.
What is your prediction for the Cats this year? What do you think their record is? What do you think ultimately they do in terms of postseason playoff or whatever it is?
So last year I was really high on this group. I've been on the Avery Johnson bandwagon ever since he was a junior in high school, and I saw that kid play. I said, this guy is going to be a stud. And I still believe that he can develop into that. I was high on him last year. I had him going 10-2. That prediction looked like it was going to be close up until the end of the season collapsed. And I look at the schedule and, it really does feel like if they can get that game against Iowa State, then the whole entire schedule opens up. There's a few games that worry me. At Baylor is going to be one that I kind of circle as, okay, if they can win this game, they should be able to win that game. If they win that game, then it's going to kind of open up the season again. You go to Oklahoma State, we don't know how good they're going to be, but that feels like a game you should be able to get. K-State struggled there. The big one that I look at as this could be a potential loss, or right now as it sits on paper, is Utah. I think they're going to be improved this season. I'm not sure I'm sold on them winning the Big 12 train, but I think that's probably a game that if K-State loses, that's probably going to be the one. I struggled with a prediction. I did another podcast. I picked them to go 11-1 and make the Big 12 championship game. I think that this is the year that K-State really kind of pushes through. There's a lot of folks who are sleeping on what this defense can do with Austin Romaine and VJ Payne. So I actually think that the defense is going to be one of the better ones in the Big 12, and it's going to help Avery Johnson not have to be all world. I think he's going to be really good. I'm not so sure that he's a Heisman Trophy candidate as it is today, but I think he's going to do what's necessary, and I could see K-State winning those close games that they lost last year and really kind of propelling them into the Big 12 championship game. If you're 11-1, I don't believe that you have to actually win the Big 12 championship to get into the college football playoff.
Yeah.
I think with the way it's constructed, hopefully the Big 12 can get two teams in, and you know what? If they don't win it and they get a home game in Manhattan, that would be really cool.
I almost, it's interesting now that you mentioned that real quick before I let you go, that I think it would be great for K-State to obviously host a playoff game. It would be great, obviously, for them to get in. But I think for some part of me still thinks that if you can say you host a playoff game, and it'd be great to be the 3 or the 4 seed or the 1 or the 2, but saying that you were the 6 or saying you were the 7 and you got to host a playoff game, it feels like that would mean more maybe. As weird as that sounds, like you have to play an extra game and everything like that. But if you play the 10, you beat the 10, you get a playoff win on the resume, it's a national audience, people are seeing that. People look at Manhattan all of a sudden and realize, okay, this is a fun place to go to school at. I think it can maybe do more for your program and more for the city in general if you were to host that playoff game, which is kind of weird. You'd almost say I want the bye, but hosting a playoff game is obviously very intriguing and might even be better just economically for everybody.
And how many teams who won their home game, every single team in the college football playoff went on to win the next game, right? Every single team who was the quote unquote home team lost. So that's also something to keep in mind, is that, is there a correlation there? I don't know, but it's interesting to look at for sure.
Cole Carmody, he is the recruiting editor for Go PowerCat on 24/7 Sports. Cole, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. We'll have to do this again at some point during the middle of the season.
For sure. Thanks, Drew.
So again, big thanks to Cole Carmody. A great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Again, you can go check out his stuff at Go PowerCat, 24/7 Sports. Everybody over there does a great job. I mean, the forum stuff is a lot of fun. It's fun to follow. It's entertaining. It's chaotic. Those guys at 24/7 do a fantastic job with what they do. All right, we got a little bit of time left. Let's get to overtime.
And the game is tied. We're going to overtime. And kick for the tie. We could be headed to overtime. And hello, extra football.
All right, so for overtime, the AFCA, American Federation of Coaches, or American Football Coaches Association, rather, they come out with a poll every year. And this poll matters even less than the AP does. The AP influences the college football playoff one, whatever. So technically it doesn't matter. But the coaches poll matters even less, but it gets a vibe for how the coaches feel for the season and everything like that, not just like the writers or whoever's covering the sport. So K-State, as it pertains to this podcast perfectly, are inside of the top 25. They sit at 20th in the country. Real quick, briefly, to go through for Missouri and for KU. Missouri got votes. They're basically 27th, if you want to, 27th in the country. KU also got votes. So all the locals getting votes. KU, not as many as Missouri, of course. Missouri right there on the cusp. K-State are in. So 20th. It gets, this is where, and I brought it up with Cole, this is where K-State belongs. Like, every single year, it never fails. Like 17th, 16th, to 23rd, 24th. That's the range we normally see K-State in. A lot of respect from the coaches, for not just Coach Kleiman, but for the program and its history and what they have at Manhattan. it doesn't mean anything, but I think this is something to go on where the AP poll comes out in a few days. It'll be interesting to see where they have K-State, where they have Missouri if they're in, and the same thing for KU as well. But regarding K-State, it shows as well that coaches expect them to be the better team out of all the locals. Not that that's a surprise, because I think that's kind of what, people believe to be true from in terms of roster construction, schedule, quarterback play, because out of all the quarterbacks, Jalen Daniels was great. Bo Pribula, we don't know yet, or Sam Horn, or Matt Zollers. We know Avery Johnson is really, really talented. We've seen it. Jalen Daniels as well, but health has been an issue for him. Avery Johnson, it's just a matter of him putting all the pieces together, I think, as I've said before, and he's going to be good. I think that's the assumption there, is that Avery Johnson can take that next step and be one of the top 10 quarterbacks, not just in the Big 12, of course, in all of college football. I think we went through the Athletics list of quarterbacks. Avery Johnson was like 22nd. I just disagree with that. Avery Johnson's top 20 in my mind. In regards to quarterbacks, I think you could make a case that by the end of the season, he's up into that top 10 conversation. So for reference, and anybody else that wants to know, the only team that's above them in the Big 12 that's higher is Arizona State at 11. So Arizona State, K-State, the top 5, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, Notre Dame, Clemson, after that, Oregon, Alabama, LSU, Miami, in terms of the top 10. Look, again, it doesn't matter to me how this goes, because it doesn't matter. No, you shouldn't be concerned about the coaches poll rating. When the AP poll comes out in a few days, that's the one that you should be paying attention to, and the one that can really not trigger people, but it can get you a little bit upset if K-State's not in the top 25 or whatever the case is. I think they'll be in, just the same as what they are in this coaches poll. But we can go off of that a little bit more when the AP poll comes out. That'll be next week when we'll react to that, because it'll be out, I think, by then. It should be out by then in next week's episode. That's going to do it for the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Instagram, we got a lot of stuff planned post-game during the college football season on Instagram. I'll be going on IG Live afterwards, reacting to the games. You are going to be a sole participant as well. All of you can be participants in the post-game chatter this college football season. I want it to be something that's not just me talking. I want it to be everybody and they're chiming in. So go subscribe on YouTube, Instagram. Go follow the station, The Fan, at The Fan 965 or 965 The Fan. If you just search it, it'll be there. I'll be going live on that channel, as well as the YouTube page for 965 The Fan as well. A lot of fun stuff planned. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Looking forward to all of the future podcasts coming out as well. Phil Steele is going to be joining the podcast as well. Not sure if it'll be this upcoming podcast or the one after that, or if I might just wait until right before the college football season and just pop it out with the national preview. We got a plan for that later on in just a couple of weeks, but we're almost there. 17 days until college football, baby. I'm so excited. You should be excited. Yes, it's that time. Thank you for listening as well, or watching, however you may be doing it. Catch us on, again, YouTube, Instagram Live during the season. Also, wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll catch you next week for another episode of the 249 Miles of College Football Podcast. Till then, peace.